Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every week. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C., is Shaka Ssali himself, aka the Kawale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I have to say that I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, and rather in fact insisted, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
Very good, very good. Let's start here in the United States, where a lot of people are mourning the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died on Friday of complications from pancreatic cancer at age 87. A lot of people have said that she was an icon, a trailblazer, if you will, and a person who really, to her death, fought for equal rights, human rights. Let's start there.
Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Ruth Ginsburg, has been lauded by many people across the political spectrum, as you said, as having been, to some, a trailblazer when it came to championing the rights of women and the rights really of Americans, and especially the type of Americans that ordinarily do not have a voice. She was lauded as a pathfinder. Others have suggested that she was, in fact, a giant jurist, even though, in fairness to her, she had said in some of the interviews when she was appointed to the Supreme Court in the early 90s that she had, in fact, the honor and the opportunity to climb, in her words, not mine, on the shoulders of giants. And apparently, when you look at her work, both as an activist, as a jurist, as an associate justice of the Supreme Court, there is incontrovertible evidence that not only did she turn into a legal tower, some would suggest a legal pillar, and others, in fact, go to the extent of talking about a legal and jurist treasure, that in fact she herself actually became a giant of sorts.
When she passed on last week, I was talking to my wife, and she said that when she was in law school, she wanted to do clerk work for her. She, in fact, applied to do some clerk work there, but she never got in. But precisely because she looked at her as a role model. And so many women lawyers in this country look up to her as somebody who really opened up so many doors for them. Your thoughts?
No, you are right. As a matter of fact, I was going to say that, well, since my friend, your wife, did not succeed in being a clerk to the late now Supreme Court Associate Justice Ruth Ginsburg, maybe you could make arrangements and look forward for her daughter, Victoria. She probably could have inspired Victoria, who knows, and Victoria could grow up to go to law school and become a lawyer in her own right, and probably walk in the footsteps of the giant, Ms. Ginsburg. You know, the good thing about Ginsburg, it's not about the personal, intellectual, and jurist qualities alone. They even talk about the fact that when it came to the business of the Supreme Court, here was an individual who, for some reason, did not see the world through ideological lenses. Rather, she actually looked at the world through what they say principles. It was through principles, it was what, as far as she's concerned, she felt that was the right thing to do. And it was being there for the small girl, the small woman, the small lady, for the people that did not really have a voice, to such an extent that some legal historians have in fact compared her with the other great jurist, great associate justice of the Supreme Court, who also made history, just like Ginsburg, Thurgood Marshall, and made history because becoming the first African American to occupy that position, and subsequently became the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, championing the human rights or the rights of people who looked like him, you and me, and therefore he is actually credited for having been the champion of civil rights when it came to the Supreme Court of America. And in the same sense, that is how Ginsburg is looked at as somebody that was really the champion of women's rights, better known, of course, as human rights.
Over the weekend, I was listening to the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who said that they're going to build a statue in her honor in her home state of New York, specifically in Brooklyn. But he said something that stood out for me that I found that was so profound, in a sense that he said, I quote, she selfishly pursued truth and justice in a world of division, giving voice to the voiceless, uplifting those who were pushed aside by forces of hate and indifference. When you look at it in the context of where we are today, what a profound statement.
Profound statement indeed. And of course, there are many people who are right now worried about what she represented, especially when it came to the issue of the woman's right to choose. The woman's right to choose. Roe v. Wade.
Yeah. Abortion.
So, to be honest, basically she believed in choice. She believed that a woman should have the choice to do what she wanted to do with her body, that she should be the one to manage or to make decisions regarding her body and not others, especially men, to tell him or the state for that matter what to do with her body. She was a fiercely independent-minded person, but above and beyond, she was able to act as a bridge.
Going back to the point you made earlier in reference to a note that she left with her granddaughter, there are reports out there that President Donald Trump has announced that yes, he's going to appoint a woman or install, and conservative senators have welcomed the idea. They said no matter what, it's the president's call, and they're willing to bring that nominee for a vote on the floor of U.S. Senate, regardless of the fact that we are having elections. In some places, people have already started voting. Early voting is taking place in some states here in the United States.
Yes, of course. Again, that is called politics. One of the interesting definitions of politics is an art. And as an art, it is the art of all possibilities. It is obvious that President Donald Trump and his Republican colleagues see an opportunity, in fact, a great opportunity, to control the Supreme Court of the United States for the next generation, especially because if he were to appoint a replacement, and the Senate appointed or confirmed the appointment of a replacement, the numbers will be 6 in favor of the Republicans to 3, those who would be on the side of the Democratic Party in the Supreme Court, in which case they would pretty much dominate almost every case that comes on the table. In fact, the magic number of those who would not like to see an appointment before the election is that they hope that they can actually find 4 senators on the Republican Party who are not willing to go along with the president. So far, there are 2 individuals, 2 senators so far as we talk. Because if they falter, they are very likely to lose their positions, to lose their job. And so that's part of the reason why there is likely to be 4 senators who could actually come up and make it impossible for the Republicans to essentially confirm the appointment of President Trump with a simple majority. It is assuming that all the Democratic Party senators and the 2 independent senators stick together. Then they are in a position to deny the majority party the simple majority.
Let's go to Uganda. Let's go to Justin. Justin says she's a lawyer, and she did her law school here in the Washington D.C. She went to Georgetown University for her law degree, and she said that she's saddened by the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What, for the context of people who are in Africa, what can young girls who are aspiring to be lawyers, to be judges, or to be on the Supreme Court in their respective countries, what can they learn from this lady?
I think they can learn, for example, how she operated. She was guided not by ideology, she was guided not by her gender, but she was guided by the issues, whether in fact it was the right thing to do. She was guided by principles. She was guided by the fact that she wanted to be on the side of those who were voiceless.
Let's go to another Facebook comment here. Let's go to Olemide, Emanuela Olemide in Lagos, Nigeria. She says, I'm an aspiring lawyer. One day I would like to become a judge, and possibly if I can serve my country at the highest level, maybe to become a Supreme Court judge. What does it take really for a young girl like me to become that person? That, for example, the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
First of all, Emanuela, I think that you realize that Associate Justice Ginsburg was an intellectual tower, an intellectual giant of sorts, really. You have to be willing to work incredibly hard, like she did. You have to be incredibly principled, which means you have to be incredibly disciplined. And so if you are willing to work very, very hard, and you are willing to be the best jurist, for example, that you could be, and you are willing to be the best judge that you could be, and you have the commitment and the dexterity, please, Emanuela, go for it.
That's a very good way to maybe to transition to our next segment. Let's talk about somebody, Paul Rusesabagina, a former hotelier lauded as a hero during the 1994 Rwandan genocide, who recently spoke to the New York Times in his cell and said that he was duped by the Rwandan authorities into returning to his home country last month to face charges of terrorism and murder, boarding a plane that he thought was going to Burundi and ended up in Kigali. Your thoughts, Shaka?
You know, it is interesting that we now have a little bit more details about Paul Rusesabagina's situation. Because you remember that a couple of weeks ago, the Rwandan President Paul Kagame had announced how Paul Rusesabagina had, in fact, gone to Rwanda voluntarily on his own volition. But now we know that, in fact, it was something that someone could probably even call illegal and probably a forced kind of repatriation. One could, in fact, be tempted even to use the word kidnap. There is no question that Paul Rusesabagina knew exactly what he was doing. He had flown from the United States to Dubai, which was in fact supposed to be en route, apparently, to Burundi, where he had been invited by a preacher to go and address some churches. So, from the story that we saw in the New York Times, I think one could confidently say that it must have been some kind of collaboration between the Rwandan authorities and authorities in Dubai, and to a certain degree, the contact in Burundi. Because at least according to the New York Times, even though Paul Rusesabagina comes up with the specific names of the preacher has apparently not returned their inquiries. So it must have been a sort of conspiracy.
Was it a conspiracy, or this preacher was working for the Rwandan government? Basically, they figured that's the only way to get him, since Paul was a very close associate of this guy.
It could be possible, but I think that we should actually celebrate the fact that we are talking about Paul Rusesabagina, who is at least alive in the cells of Kigali, the Rwandan capital. Something else could have happened to Paul. But at least, since Paul is still alive, at least from everything that we know, I think that Paul should be put through due process. He should be put through due process, but he should really face, I think, a court that is independent. Because what I have read in the New York Times, for example, suggests that when you talk about Rwanda, you're talking about a democratically challenged country. You're talking about a country where a president in the most recent elections was able to get about 99% of the vote only.
Why not 100?
You know, to be honest with you, when you talk about figures that are so popular, so famous, I am reminded of Jesus Christ. But I frankly think that even if Jesus Christ were running for an election in some constituency, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for Jesus Christ himself to get 99%.
Shaka, let me follow up on that. When you said democratically challenged, what do you mean? Paul Kagame has subjected himself to the people of Rwanda several times. They have elected him. He has won the majority vote. His ruling party wins the majority vote. So, when you talk about a democratically challenged country, what do you mean exactly?
You know, You are talking about the optics of an election that some, in fact, refer to as a selection. Even a strong man at one time called Joseph Stalin, used to preside over what was called the Soviet Union, which collapsed many, many years ago. Joseph Stalin, he himself, who was the supreme leader of the Soviet Union, actually used to talk about how, yes, you can have an election, and in fact, people will go to vote. But at the end of the day, what matters really is not who goes to vote at an election. What matters is who counts the vote. Because who counts the vote, first of all, is appointed by somebody who is apparently competing in that particular game. And that particular individual who counts the vote passes on the results to another individual who announces the results. That individual announces the results that do not reflect the will of the people or the will of those individuals who actually went to vote, but rather the will of the individual who announces the results.
How about critics who said that, like it or not, Paul Rusesabagina has been a critic of the Rwandan government, of President Paul Kagame, that perhaps that's the very reason he found himself in trouble. There are some who have even gone further to say that in Rwanda there can only be one hero, because there can only be one hero who stopped the genocide. And a lot of people refer to President Paul Kagame as the person who stopped the genocide.
As a matter of fact, in one of the interviews, and I have had several interviews with Paul Rusesabagina, we should point out, by the way, that Paul Rusesabagina is not simply, perhaps by any measure or any metric, perhaps the most famous Rwandan alive. That man, I believe that in 2005, he was awarded a presidential medal of freedom by then US President George W. Bush. That happens to be, by the way, the highest civilian award in the United States of America. He was also subsequently awarded the Lantos Human Rights Award. Lantos was a genocide survivor in Germany. He subsequently relocated to the United States and then became a congressman. And there was an award that was put in place for him. And I remember you, Paul Ndiho, personally went to Capitol Hill on the occasion that Paul Rusesabagina was in fact receiving that award.
Yeah, I covered that
and
story, correct.
Yes, and brought him, came back with him to our studio. And we did an interview. Mind you, just before he received that award, the Rwandan government had been pressuring the Lantos Committee not to grant that award to Paul Rusesabagina. Because as you rightly said, I have also read variously that when it comes to the heroes as far as Rwanda is concerned, Rwandan government officials do not like the idea of what they characterize as manufactured heroes. Manufactured heroes by the United States of America, manufactured heroes by European countries.
What do you mean manufactured? Are we talking about a factory manufacturing these heroes, or these are people being recognized for their acts of bravery?
I suppose what they mean is that here is an individual who happens to be Rwandan. He's in fact being feted in European, in American capitals with incredible environmentally and politically friendly awards. The type of awards that are not accessible to the incumbent leadership in Rwanda.
Let me do a quick follow-up here. There are a lot of people who talk about President Paul Kagame as a beacon of hope for good governance in the larger context for Africa, that he has managed to turn that country around despite what happened in 1994. Rwanda's economic trajectory is on a totally different level compared to the other countries in the region. They talk about Paul Kagame as the hero that we talked about earlier, whose forces, the RPF, stopped the genocide. Why on earth would he be interested in arresting Paul Rusesabagina, who is just an ordinary guy?
It seems to me that Paul Rusesabagina is someone, as I said earlier, who is perceived by the powers that be in Rwanda to pose a legitimate political threat. And as a matter of fact, what has happened now could actually backlash in the sense that it could open the Pandora's box, so to speak. We are probably going to see a lot of reports on Rwanda and a lot of voices and a lot of different and sometimes contradictory narratives.
I will use an analogy of a beautiful girl. A lot of people admire what's going on in Rwanda. They look at Rwanda as that beautiful girl around the block. Everybody talks about Rwanda. Why would the president or the country want to put that reputation on the line by arresting Paul Rusesabagina if they didn't have that incontrovertible evidence that you alluded to?
They have the opportunity now to show it. Otherwise, I would probably say, psychologists would probably tell you that you are talking about insecurity. You are talking about complex. You know, when you look at sometimes the behavior of people, if you look at the behavior of an individual who was not doing very well and suddenly he has fallen into things, sociologists basically say that what he is exhibiting is a reflection of what they call conspicuous consumption. And psychologists also have a say in that type of dynamic. They actually call it compensatory consumption. I rest my case.
Are you suggesting that Rwanda is, again, that beautiful girl with a lot of makeup, but under that makeup there are a lot of scars?
It's quite possible, unless, again, they come up with the sort of incontrovertible evidence to nail this world-acknowledged human rights activist.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Shaka.
Thank you very much, too, for giving me the opportunity.